Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Axel and Friends podcast. My name is Axel Ablaze, and today we are talking about it's definitely considered, I would believe, a black sheep topic when it comes to the anime and manga fandoms, but an important topic nonetheless, and that is anime dubs. Whether you like them or you hate them, they are a big part of the anime industry. And a big reason for bringing up this topic this week is because of obviously the big news of the merger between Funimation and Crunchyroll. And with that, I wanted to talk about various topics with, the anime dubbing process, its history, stuff like that, and, what's the current state of it. And to talk about this topic today, I've got Drew from What If Universe joining me. Drew, welcome to the podcast and welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me on. I kind of recommend this topic because, one, the merger happened. Two, I think this is relatively important for discussing about anime because I think there's a lot of newer people coming in because of dub content, whether it's English or French, whichever language that someone naturally speaks in, honestly.
Absolutely. Dubbed anime, whether people want to recognize it or not, it is a big drawing in factor for bringing new people into the world of anime, especially with Netflix. Netflix is one of the biggest ones with just how big of its platform it is compared to other ones. But this is a topic that Drew actually brought up to me. The first person to do that, and I appreciate that. And I will say, as a little plug in here, if anyone else out there has cool ideas for the Axel and Friends podcast that you think would be great and that you'd want to be part of, by all means, hit me up with a DM, join my Discord server, whatnot, and we can definitely discuss that. But obviously today we are discussing dubbed anime, and the news of Crunchyroll and Funimation merging together, it's obviously been part of the discussion for a while now. It was announced months back that there was talks and an upcoming agreement on their merger, but it was always one of those things of like, okay, is this going to be allowed to happen or not? And it finally apparently got the green light, and some people are taking it well, and some people are not taking it well. So, Drew, what is your stance on that topic?
I think that this can become very dangerous waters here because you have two of the more prominent companies merging. However, though, I think if Netflix has their ties with Viz Media a lot better, I think there's a good chance that Netflix could step up and become the new, number two, I guess. I don't think they'll be number one because honestly, Funimation and Crunchyroll combined, that's way overpowered as far as mergers go, in my opinion, from what I'm seeing. But there's a good chance that there's still decent competition, as at the moment there's like 5 or 6 other companies. Well, I guess we'll just call it a Sony because Sony owns both of them now. So we'll just say like the Sony group is the biggest one, obviously. But I think maybe if Netflix acquires one of the other ones, or if they step up who they buy licenses with, like when they bought Ava, that really impressed me with Netflix. Like that was a good business move. Whether or not people enjoyed the Netflix dub for Ava, that's more of a personal opinion. But the original's still there, and I do think that was a smart move on them, especially with the new Ava movie coming out soon.
Oh, absolutely. Evangelion is a big part of anime history, and that was definitely a big talking point when Netflix got it. An even bigger talking point, obviously, than when they redubbed it. Because I know that rubbed some people the wrong way, because in some ways the Ava dub, the original one, is very iconic. So for them to change things and also change who was voice acting what, it definitely hurt. for some people that, liked aspects of the original dub. But I do agree, Netflix, while it is still gaining a lot of traction, especially the fact that it's continuing to grab more and more prolific series for its network. Obviously, one of the big ones was Seven Deadly Sins. Whether people want to recognize that or not, that was a big grab that it had. Obviously, more recently, the fact that it had the Shaman King reboot, Eden Zero, and upcoming later this year, the fact that it's getting JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 6. These are all big things that goes to show that obviously Netflix has a lot of money that it can throw around, and it can it can fight with the big competition. But once you look past Sony's group and Netflix, the competition drops off after that. Because, I mean, one of the other studios that obviously Sony has is Aniplex, and that was another one of the dub studios that was somewhat big before it got bought out by Sony. So Sony already has 3 distinct kind of companies under its umbrella here. But other than that,
so if you go with that list, technically now it's only 4, if you think about it.
In terms of other companies.
Yeah, because they own Aniplex.
Right.
Because I was considering its own thing, but now I know it's owned by Sony. That is more bothersome to me, because that's a lot.
Yeah, no.
The properties they own.
I've known that because I have a Funimation subscription, so like I see the Aniplex stuff on there all the time. But outside of Crunchyroll, Funimation, Aniplex, and Netflix, the only other ones that you can really talk about are like Sentai Filmworks, Viz Media, and High Dive. And even when you think about High Dive, they have a current partnership with Crunchyroll on their Verve platform. So you can, like, High Dive is kind of like a brother sister company to Crunchyroll in a way right now, because they're on the Crunchyroll platform. So it's narrowing a lot right now, and honestly, like, I would not be surprised if more companies get bought out in the future by either Sony or Netflix, just because they just have way more capital to deal with than the other groups do. And that does concern me, because having healthy competition is a good thing, and when you start limiting who is able to have what, then you start losing out on some of the uniqueness, some of like the different business practices that some people can have. And on top of, like, obviously one of the big concerns I have for Crunchyroll is that, Crunchyroll gets taken over by Sony, and then they have the awful video player that Funimation has. Because Funimation has one of the worst video players for a subscription service. Like, period. It's awful. I don't know, like, how much experience you have, but, yeah.
Is if Crunchyroll's video player switched over to Funimation, it's like, hey, yours works a lot better. Why don't we just take this?
I would hope so, but like, I don't know, because that's the thing.
I love the fact with the comments section with Crunchyroll, that really helps it stand out for me, honestly, as a platform.
It'll be interesting to see what kind of give and take there might be with it. I don't know. I guess we'll just have to wait and see for the future. I am curious to see if, with Sony's backing, some of the Crunchyroll originals get better in certain ways. Because, like, obviously certain Crunchyroll originals are fine. Like, Dr. Stone, I think, was a good adaptation for Season 1. That was a Crunchyroll original. Tower of God was a good Crunchyroll original. But
Tower of God was a month. That was technically not original. That was written by a Korean company.
Right, no, but it was considered a Crunchyroll original adaptation.
As far as that's what you mean. I thought you meant like original story, like High.
No, well, neither is Dr. Stone. No,
That
Dr.
that's
Stone
something
isn't
interesting.
either, but it is considered a Crunchyroll original production. The same thing happens with Netflix. Netflix has their Netflix original productions, but obviously they are adapting whatever material. Like Seven Deadly Sins is a Netflix original adaptation, but it's obviously by Kodansha with Weekly Shonen Magazine
Yeah,
and whatnot. So I am curious to see if with Sony's backing we get better Crunchyroll originals, because obviously, like I was gonna say, there are also bad Crunchyroll anime adaptations. I would consider God of High School one of those because of how much it butchered the source material and condensed it into 13 episodes. And I would also consider X-Arm, obviously, to be one of the worst things that could be part of the quote-unquote Crunchyroll original adaptation umbrella. Like, oh my god, that was bad.
I
That
do
was
want to mention three other companies we didn't talk about. So there's G Kids Films. They basically dubbed Lupin. They dubbed all the Ghibli stuff recently. I think they acquired that from Disney a while back, and I think they dubbed a few other things. So I think that one might be on the market for Netflix potentially because Ghibli's a big enough name. They might pay for that.
mm-hmm.
The other two is Distrotech, which that one, and also in my opinion, is going to be probably a Netflix one, but it's very iffy because that's a fan run thing. But what they do is they basically remaster a bunch of like older anime, so it's
Mm-hmm.
very iffy on that front. But Netflix being a more historical type place, like picking up older stuff, they might want it there. It's very iffy though, you know.
And I think
But
there was a third one as well that you mentioned.
yeah, yes, the surprise up and comer is Cartoon Network.
Well, I guess
They
though with Cartoon
they
Network
literally
that would be
bought,
under the Warner Brothers,
yeah,
Turner Media, like HBO kind of umbrella.
yeah, which is really surprising to me because they bought, I believe, stuff. They might have bought an anime studio, or they're planning to open one up, basically. So we might get maybe like something similar to Ben 10 because there's a lot of people who like the original like anime style of it, quote unquote. Maybe Generate Rex because that was also anime stylized. Like there's a few shows on Cartoon Network, even though they're not anime, they do look very similar. I feel like they could have recognized that market exists, possibly. At least that's my current theory.
It's very possible. I mean, like, the thing is, we do have to consider the possibility that obviously some of the bigger media companies could buy into the anime field eventually if they wanted to. Like, obviously, if what you're saying is true, like, and the fact that they own Toonami, like Warner Brothers could totally, go more into the anime space if they wanted to, if they wanted to like funnel more money into it. Um, Amazon, like they purchased a lot of anime for their Amazon Prime platform. They just don't dub stuff. They just kind of purchase the sub rights. So if they ever
Which is
decided
funny
to dub, that would be
because
good.
on Twitter, several times I complained to Amazon the fact they don't have a dubbing studio. It's like with if you have you seen Invincible? I don't know if you've seen it on
Not yet.
Amazon or not. All
I
right.
that came out when I had a lot of other stuff that I was watching, so it's still on my to watch list.
Well, it's not an anime, quote unquote,
Right.
but
It's
I
it's
will
it's
say the
based on a
voice acting
comic.
was. I will say the voice acting was fantastic, and I'm very surprised that Amazon doesn't have a division for that. It's very weird.
Fair enough. And then I mean, you could say Hulu, but at this point, Hulu does fall majorly under the Disney umbrella. Um, which, by all means, if Disney decided to go more into the anime space, they could. But obviously, they do a lot as is with their in-house animation stuff, Pixar, whatnot. So, do they really need to get into the anime space? No, they could because they've got the capital, but I think they just kind of lend out the rights to certain things. Because I know there have been various Star Wars manga and anime projects that have come out or coming out. So it's not like they don't dabble with that. And obviously, like things with Kingdom Hearts, too. But I don't know that they necessarily would be looking to get a stronger foothold in the anime space at this time, at least.
Here's a proper article for the Cartoon Network thing I was referencing.
Go ahead. Sure, go ahead.
And let me close it out. So, Tal says Warner Brothers Animation and Cartoon Network Studios to start producing anime underneath Jason DeMarco. Not really sure what he's done, honestly, but
maybe something in regards to Toonami, if I had to guess.
But he did have roles existing at Adult Swim, so I assume this is probably going to be within Toonami. There's probably a chance, at least as far as I can see, the idea is that they might be losing licenses to shows for Toonami, so maybe they just want to produce them in-house to make more money, possibly.
It's very possible, especially, again, because of the whole Funimation Crunchyroll merger. From what I remember, they had a better relationship with one of them, but not the other. Or supposedly. I don't know if that's changed or how much that will change going forward, but it would make sense that they would start doing more. Because they have like an original like co-production going on right now with like this pirate princess anime, and obviously
there's currently 3 that they have. So there's Fena the Pirate Princess, then there's Uzumaki.
Yep.
That's
by Junji
Ito that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're doing the Blade Runner anime.
Gotcha.
So those are 3 that they're currently producing.
Well, and on top of that, they've done other co-productions and whatnot before. Like they did the Fooly Cooly Alternative and Progressive, I think, were the 2 titles. And then they also did Space Dandy, which was very interesting since that was, I believe, like the first simuldub. And I could be very wrong in that, but I just remember that just being a really big thing of, oh wow, Toonami is simuldubing Space Dandy as it's coming out in Japan. So that was really a big thing. And Toonami has definitely been a pioneer in the dubbing space for decades now. So it's really not surprising to me that they would want to get more into things. Oh, and IGPX was their mech racing anime co-production that was even before Space Dandy. Like they've done a lot. I'm
trying to think. Was it 4Kids that did Bobobo, or was that Cartoon Network that
was Cartoon Network?
Because I was thinking that was also another one that they acquired at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe at one point, until Disney took over, they used to be the dubbing studio for Pokemon, I believe, after 4Kids went under.
Right. 4Kids at least was the original one, and then Cartoon Network did have the Pokemon rights for some time before Disney took it. So
they did all the way up till, I believe it was either Black and White or X and Y, but then afterwards Disney picked up some point in the middle there.
And now Netflix has the rights. Yeah.
Which that's also interesting how many times it switched hands.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Pokemon is a very lucrative property to have, so
I mean, if I was Netflix, I would have taken Pokemon. That's a very massive property you can do stuff with.
Absolutely. Well, with that being said, that does give us a good segue into talking about, some of the companies that were responsible for getting a lot of people in the West into anime back in the 90s and 2000s. Obviously, one of the big ones was Toonami, but one of the more notorious ones was 4Kids. Because 4Kids dubbed a lot of anime that were very influential on us growing up, as well as controversial. Because 4Kids had Yu-Gi-Oh! It had Pokemon, it had Shaman King, it had Ultimate Muscle, and obviously the most notorious 4Kids dub of all, One Piece. Like, Four Kids, impacted a lot of our childhoods, majorly, both good and bad, I would say. I like, what would you say your experience was with the Four Kids dubbing? Were you in favor, in against, kind of in the middle?
From my perspective, I've been okay. That the main reason, though, I'll say I'm kind of against it is because the fact with, for example, with Yu-Gi-Oh, with both GX and 5Ds, you have like 2 seasons for each of them from each of them, completely undubbed. Basically,
Yes.
it does not exist.
Yep.
And what's funny is that they basically did retcons in order for it to work. So with like GX, Jaden's just dead. It doesn't establish that he was alive later on. That's kind of what happened with him. And with 5Ds, it basically was like, oh, Yusei just saves the world from the first guy, and nothing else bad happened.
Yeah, that was always one of the unfortunate things, for sure, that for the Yu-Gi-Oh franchises, they just did not dub the 2 darkest seasons for GX and 5Ds, because by all means, like, with GX, it was literally, oh hey, guess what, you're facing off against this like, the devil himself, just like killing people and bringing them into the darkness. And then in 5Ds, it was just like, hey, guess what, children's card games are literally going to create the apocalypse in the future, so we're sending robots back in time to kill people and whatnot, and kill children's card games. And it's just like, whoa. And then you think about it, and it's just like, this would not work for American audiences based on how, like, anime was approached back then. Because the other big thing is that,
I don't know though, because for season 4 of Yu-Gi-Oh, I would just say it's almost equivalent as bad. You have this terrorist organization that's literally stealing people's souls.
oh,
Like,
with the seal of Orichalcos and whatnot.
Yes, that's probably one of the best seasons, like, for kids dub.
Sure, but at
In
the
my
same
opinion.
time, it wasn't like they were, like, outright killing people. It was just like, oh no, their soul has been taken, which they were doing kind of from the get-go with people in the Shadow Realm and stuff like that. So
I guess they could have reintroduced that there. I understand GX though, because that creature thing, you have had to reskin that in order to make it look a bit more friendlier.
and that's one of the big things with dubbed anime from that time, is that with dubbed anime there was another big aspect of it, and that was a lot of censorship. There was a lot of censorship for the American versions of various anime, and Yu-Gi-Oh obviously had its very fair share of censorship, whether that was taking out guns from people's hands and giving them finger guns, or turning literal saw blades that were supposed to cut through ankles into magical saw blades, or again, the Shadow Realm, instead of in the original Yu-Gi-Oh series where people just straight up died. Like, they were like, oh yeah, no, they're dead. No Shadow Realm.
I do want to bring up One Piece again, because when they're reaching the end of their contract, they just had everybody die at the end.
Yeah, no, really right before the whole Skypiea arc stuff, when there are, like, boats falling from the sky, they were just like, oh, they're dead. They were crushed by boats. But obviously that was, again, a big part of the whole One Piece censorship, because, like, dear God, the amount of censorship in One Piece was ridiculous. I mean, Sanji cigarettes were turned into lollipops. They took out all of Laboon, so that wasn't a thing. So if they ever had gotten to Brook, which they never would have done so, because One Piece just kept getting darker as time went on, that would have been a mess. They censored
Thriller Bark is kind of like a Halloween-esque thing. I felt like that could have been okay.
They also would have had to give Frankie pants. Let's be honest.
that would.
Frankie
I
would
think
not have
that
been
would
allowed to
have
wear
been a bigger
Speedo.
problem, actually.
Yes, it would have. Absolutely. But I mean, that's kind of the thing with a lot of the 4Kids properties that they chose outside of Pokemon. Obviously, Pokemon is kind of meant to be for kids and whatnot. Other than, you know, the Safari Zone where the groundskeeper had a gun, or the beach episode thing where they gave James boobs. Like, otherwise, it was mostly fine. But, like, for other stuff, like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Shaman King, or One Piece, or Ultimate Muscle, like, they were... Oh, go ahead.
There are other few good ones I'll mention. Like, the best example I'd say for a property that 4Kids handled was Sonic X.
Sure.
Like, the dub did so well in the United States, while in Japan it was doing awful, that we managed to get in our season because 4Kids commissioned it.
Yep. Which 4Kids also commissioned extra content for Yu-Gi-Oh as well. That was Capsule Monsters. That was a commission
awful.
thing. It was. It really was.
I mean, they also commissioned the first movie, technically. That was also commissioned by 4Kids.
Pyramid of Light?
Yeah, that was commissioned by them.
Are you sure? I don't know if that doesn't sound right, because Pyramid of Light was kind of dark. Like, much darker than what they were doing with the 4Kids dubs. I don't know.
I think because Pyramid of Light was a movie, they had more leeway.
Fair enough. But my point kind of stands.
I can look it up.
Sure. My point stands, though, that they took on a lot of properties that had a lot more mature scenes and whatnot, I think, than they were anticipating. And so they had to censor a lot. And really kind of, in a sense, dumb things down for an American audience, since they were kind of treating anime more so as a kids thing rather than a, you know, kids, young adults kind of space. So yeah, I thank 4Kids in a way for bringing a lot of stuff to the States, because if it wasn't for 4Kids, like, we wouldn't have as many things as we do now, for sure. And as weird as it is to say, had 4Kids not dubbed, like, One Piece, for example, I don't know that the people in the West would have been as interested in it, because we made it was such a meme because of 4Kids that I think a lot of people kind of got into it. If we were supposed to be like, oh, we're supposed to take this rubber pirate seriously from the get-go, I don't know that we would have. I don't think we would have taken it as seriously.
I think the important thing that I believe I remember. So there's this YouTuber called Monkey Jones who goes by Semi and Jimmy now, and he brought up a good point in he has a One Piece channel that's like a side channel he does that's called Monkey D. Jones. And basically, he brought up that if it wasn't for 4Kids, technically, he would have not liked it as a kid and be able to go back to it as an adult to figure out where it's at now, basically.
Yeah,
and that's
I
a
think
pretty
that's
interesting
true.
perspective.
Mm-hmm. I would definitely agree with that. I think that is definitely true. Before we get into Toonami, I did want to also bring up some of the other ones from the 90s that brought over dubbed anime. We had Kids WB. That was a big part of the Saturday morning cartoons block. They had various anime, some of which were from 4Kids, although they also had some of their own cartoons and whatnot as well. There was Fox Kids. With Fox Kids, the big anime that they had, that was Digimon. Like, Fox Kids dubbed Digimon all the way up to season 4 with Frontier. So I think that was a big part of people's childhood. And then ABC Family also had a Saturday morning cartoon block that had various anime on it. And the one that I'm always reminded of is Flint the Time Detective. That was on ABC Family. There's not a whole lot of other ones that I necessarily remember from ABC Family, but That was those are some of the other ones, at least from the 90s, outside of like Four Kids and Toonami, that really had like dubbed anime that a lot of us kids grew up with. Were there any ones?
I mean, there's a few others. I believe Nickelodeon had Saban's production with Dragon Ball. Actually, I believe that was around that time.
With well, it was not. Dragon Ball had the Ocean. Dragon Ball had the Ocean dub before it had the Funimation dub, but that was all through Cartoon Network and Toonami.
Because I could have sworn they had the rights some point when they're airing.
So Nickelodeon had the rights to Dragon Ball Z Kai, in like the 2010s.
I think I remember what happened. So, because I think there was I saw this image of Mr. Popo being blue, and I think, was that Four Kids who did that? Because I can't remember why he would be that color.
It might have been. I do remember Blue Popo, but I do question if that was part of Kai or not. But I do know that at least there was the Ocean dub first that ran on.
Oh, it was Four Kids.
It was. Yeah. Yep. And I don't remember when that was necessarily that they did that, but at the very least,
know the UK had their own dub version of Dragon Ball, because I know Ocean and Blue Water were the two studios that did from Z to GT, and that's basically where it stopped after till Funimation got like full rights technically.
But at the very least, there was the Ocean dub of Dragon Ball Z before there was the Funimation dub, and that was when we had the voice actor for Rolf from Ed, Edd n Eddy as Goku before Sean Schemmel took over, as well as a few other changes as well. But I still find that funny that at one point in time, Rolf was the voice of Goku and not Sean Schemmel.
Yeah, speaking of him, actually, I'm trying to remember what was the actor for Goku. I know it's not Brian Drummond. I know that's Vegeta. I'm trying to remember. It was Peter Clemens. Yeah. So, funny thing about Peter Clemens, I was actually on elevator with them at KamehaCon. It was really funny. It was like, I was wearing like a costume stuff, obviously. It's not be saying obviously. Kind of get my presence down, but it was funny when he saw me in it. It was like, what's up? And I'm like wearing this jacket, like, like what my Wife Universe character kind of looks like. He has that big overcoat thing. So it's like super hot. It's like just wearing us around. It's like, I know a few voice actors commented on it. It was kind of funny.
Very nice. Very nice.
But I don't have too much to say about that. I just thought it was funny. I was in an elevator with that guy. That'd be funny to bring that up here.
Fair enough. It's definitely a unique encounter for sure. But I think that does at least transition us then into talking about Toonami, which, because it obviously had Dragon Ball Z and then Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball GT, and it had a lot of other anime that we grew up with, and with their dubs. It had Sailor Moon, although Sailor Moon, I believe, was also on Fox Kids at one point before it was on Toonami. But obviously they had like all the movies and whatnot as well for both Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon on Toonami, which was a big thing. The fact that they actually aired anime movies on their platform, I thought was huge. You also had various Gundam series that were on Toonami, with my own personal favorite being G Gundam. But they also had like Voltron and various other series throughout its iterations, from like the weekday afternoon time slot, or eventually their midnight Adult Swim time slot as well. And I just remember growing up in the 90s and coming home from school and turning on Toonami right away to catch whatever I could before it was over. Because I always missed the first hour block because I always got home from school at like 4 o'clock, but it always ran until 5, and those were good times. They were good times. Did you grow up with Toonami during the weekdays at all, or were you just part of the Saturday group?
I'm part of a more, I would say, interesting demographic because I started watching stuff on YouTube actually because the first thing that I remember watching like fully would have been Death Note actually because someone just happened to upload the whole series on YouTube at the time. So it's like, okay, I was watching it. It's like I didn't know like where it was from or if it was legal or not obviously at the time because I think it might have been like 12 maybe. I do remember some OG Pokemon stuff, some Yu-Gi-Oh stuff further back, but I just wasn't as interested, I guess, at the time.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You didn't grow up weeby enough. I understand. It's fine.
Well, I think 4Kids just really underwhelmed me. That's probably what happened.
Right. And that like 4Kids had such a big impact again on the Saturday morning cartoons crowd. Although obviously some of it did spread into the weekday stuff, but yeah, there were a lot of not so great stuff that came from 4Kids. Some good, but a lot of not good. So I completely understand.
Like I think the only 2 shows I cared about was probably Yu-Gi-Oh because it was passable, and I think maybe Dragon Ball at the time, but there's a good chance I also might have watched that on YouTube. It's kind of iffy. My memory's a bit hazy when I get to my original watching of Dragon Ball.
Fair enough. All of mine originated on cable and satellite. That's what it was. I'm one of the OGs. So, but I mean, at least you got into it.
I'm like a weird like pre-internet time. It's like 2008. It's like you got some stuff, that's there. Like quality's iffy-ish, but it's there,
Mm-hmm. No, I remember the internet times of 2008 to 2011. I completely understand. Well then, at least because of that, you didn't necessarily then grow up with Toonami with the changes, but there were a lot of passable dubs growing up that I think a lot of people like to kind of sneer at, but there were very good dubs that we grew up with. I mean, there was Yu Yu Hakusho had a solid dub, Cowboy Bebop, whether you agree or not, Naruto or Bleach, I think had very passable dubs. Bobobo was just hilarious, and in my opinion has one of the best Johnny Yongbosh roles of all time. And then even later on, although these weren't, Code Geass was with Toonami, but Gurren Lagann, that was part of an interesting block that was actually on Sci-Fi at one point, when Sci-Fi Channel was running an anime block. Which Sci-Fi wasn't the only channel outside of like the ones that we've kind of discussed that did it. I mean, even MTV had freaking Aeon Flux back in the day. So anime was in a lot of various places, and there were good dubs that we grew up with. There were also not so great dubs that we grew up with, and again, 4Kids kind of perpetrated several of those, as well as one of the other ones back in the day, and by back in the day I mean in the 2000s, was Jetix by Disney. Like the Jetix channel did a lot of anime and cartoons and whatnot, including some of the ones that I was not the biggest fan of, Mushrambo being one of the biggest ones. I hated that anime, but I think when a lot of people talk about how quote-unquote anime dubs are so bad, they overlook a lot of the good ones that they potentially grew up with. At least for the people that grew up in the 90s or like 2000s. For the people that are on the younger side of things and they're part of the internet crowd, they, don't necessarily they didn't necessarily grow up with it. So they don't necessarily have those same attachments.
I'm in a weird position because there is some older stuff that I actually like. Like, for example, the Singapore dub of Yu-Gi-Oh! It is very funny because the idea is that it's a direct translation and there's no retakes with a lot of voice acting. So, like, it's a lot different from 4Kids. Like, with 4Kids, you can tell with the polish and everything, but this, it has a lot more of like a griminess to it, but it's more faithful to the original, which is very interesting.
See, I don't know. For me, when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh, I can only think of two people with it, and I can only think of Dan Green because of how integrated he was with the 4Kids dub of Yu-Gi-Oh, and then Little Karibo. But we will obviously get into the fan dubbing and abridged dubbing later on. But I can't.
My thing is Chuck Powers did a good job with that role. Like, for what he did, it's like he voiced a lot of different characters in the Singapore dub, and unfortunately, a lot of it's lost media. But Odex is a very interesting company because there's a lot of stuff they did dub alongside when 4Kids was doing it, technically. So it's very iffy to know how much is actually saved, technically.
Mm-hmm.
Like, One Piece, for sure, that only went for however so long, technically. They lost the license at some point. But with Yu-Gi-Oh, they had it for a relatively long time. So one day I kind of want to uncover the rest of that dub because it was really good. At least as far as like So Bad's good,
Fair enough. Which that was, I mean, speaking of So Bad It's Good, that was and I apologize if I have the wrong name, but Ghost Adventures, or it was something Ghost. Ghost Stories?
I'm pretty sure it's what
Ghost Stories. Wait, sorry, I keep talking over you.
It's fine.
Was it Ghost Stories?
I'm pretty sure.
Gotcha.
I think there's another one that I liked, although it's not politically correct at all. Obviously, it's Mad Bull 34. That one's a very like top of the line, like edgy type of anime in my perspective, because it's basically New York being told from perspective of a Japanese man, basically. And he kind of explains like the culture at the time and everything. Like, this is like the 80s, so there's a lot of like hardcore stuff that's happening, obviously.
Gotcha.
I would say, like, this is for someone who would be fine with stuff that's not politically correct and more like, just be careful, that's how it was with me.
Sure.
Because I was reviewing it for a podcast, technically. That's why I was watching it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I will say, at least with Ghost Stories, that is a unique one in that, like, they knew it was just kind of a weird anime, and they just decided to be funny with it. Which that's something that you don't see anymore, or really at all. Like, you either had the spectrum of, like, we'll make it for kids, or we're going to censor it, or they're more of a faithful adaptation. Ghost Stories is such a unique instance of dubbing that it's weird, but it's such an interesting piece of media history because of that.
I kind of hope that more properties allow that, with especially with older stuff, because I could see that working as far as how Ghost Stories went, and with moments with the 4Kids dubs, because there are moments where it's actually good. The problem is that the restrictiveness they had is what made it funny, technically.
Sure. I mean, that being said, we are definitely in an age where we are seeing anime studios and whatnot wanting faithful adaptations for the West. So, like, if anything, that would maybe fall in a fan dub.
Bigger shows, but I think some of this older stuff, honestly, doesn't matter as much, in my opinion.
You would think, but there are some older properties where, like, they could get very upset if it's handled in a bad way.
Well, from a cultural perspective, yes, I can understand that. But from an entertainment perspective, I think that if the license isn't being used, then it's like at least it would have some new life in it.
You
That'd
would,
be
I mean,
nice, you
you
know.
would think, but like there are properties because of how badly they were handled in the West. That's why we don't have them in the West. Um, like that was a big thing for the Kamen Rider franchise because of how badly Saban handled it. That is why
Oh,
Kamen Rider
I
wasn't
watched
in the
a
West.
documentary on that, and it was awful what they did with the actors over here.
Yeah, so that's the thing is that like I could definitely see that where if it was handled in the wrong way, an anime studio or company could totally just pull the plug on Western studios handling certain franchises. So, and because they take certain things as seriously as they do, so I don't know. It would still be interesting if somebody did do like a Ghost Stories handling of maybe like an older series, but I don't know that it would ever happen again just because of where we're at. But I guess we would have to see.
Well, the thing with ghost stories is that there was rules with how things had to happen, but for the most part, they had control for as far as what the lines were essentially. So there's like, oh, the ghost still has to be defeated this way. You still have to do this thing. Keep some of the names the same. I was like, other than that, go for it. That's kind of what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you have moments where it's kind of taken seriously, but then it's like, now we're just gonna make a joke about rabbits mating for a scene because there was a
Jeez.
rabbit.
Yep. Yep.
That's kind of how it went.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we move on to some of the examples of good and bad modern dubs, were there any other older dubs that you wanted to talk about before we moved on?
Uh, let's see. The OG Helsing dub was pretty good.
Yeah, a lot of the OG stuff that aired on Toonami I think was great. Um like Helsing was good. And obviously Cowboy Bebop was another one from the late night crowd. Um I did not watch what's the other one? The one with Vash the Stampede. Um
Trigun.
Trigun. I did not watch that,
So
but
I watched the first episode of Trigun, and I just genuinely didn't like it. And people were kind of mad at me on Twitter about it. And I said, like, I feel like it deviates too much from the source material as far as how the tone's taken. That's kind of why I dropped it.
fair enough.
Like, some people eventually understood where it came from. And it's like, I don't mind something deviates a little bit, but if they change, like, the tone from what you're reading, it's a lot different, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And you could argue the same thing with like a show like Invincible. Like Invincible in the comics was taken less seriously. It was more like akin to One Piece, I guess. So there were serious moments, but there was a lot of humor thrown throughout. But now with Amazon's adaptation, it's taken a lot more seriously, basically. But there's still like a few moments of humor.
That was the case with God of High School as well, for the adaptation that Crunchyroll did. Like the manhwa itself has a lot more humor. And it tackles a lot of its characters very differently than what we got to see in the anime. But then again, the God of High School anime is bad, so I mean, that's what I got to say about that.
I would be okay if they took a more serious tone and continue to adapt it properly. But if you look at, I guess, to kind of transition to modern day stuff, I would say The Promised Neverland, what they did with that. Like, sure, the dub sounds okay, but what they did story wise was a bad decision to just skip like one of the best arcs for that manga.
Mm-hmm. Which I mean, that's on the anime itself, not stuff with the
Yeah.
dub. So to
Well,
be
I'm
fair,
saying story still kind of matters to an extent. Like, it's iffy, you know? It's like,
I
it's technically a studio's fault, but at the same time, it's like, do the dub people still have to continue it? I guess licenses exist. It's a
Yeah,
little
but
iffy.
I'm not gonna judge a dub or a sub based on the anime studio. I think that's I would not judge them that way. That's not on them at that point. I mean, yes, they're still
Yeah.
adapting it, but that's not on the dubs people. It's not like the dub people were like, "Hey, make the script this way so we can write it or we can dub it this way." No, like
I
I
do
wouldn't
think
judge them.
Funimation is definitely trying to step towards that direction though lately. Like trying to influence the studios directly.
Well, I mean, yes, but that's also because they're creating these productions. They're funding them. So I
I'm
mean,
fine
that's
with
the same
them.
with Netflix and Crunchyroll.
I'm fine with them like if they're making the show, but I feel like them trying to push stuff onto stuff that's already created is a little iffy in my opinion.
I can agree with that. I can agree. Like if it deviates too much, then I agree. But that would also still be on both the anime studio and the original content publisher. So if it was a manga, like the manga magazine publisher, if it's a light novel, the light novel company, etc., etc. Um, but again, I wouldn't. I still don't know that I would judge the dub on that because that's not. It's not necessarily the dub actors' fault if their parent
Well,
company.
portraying a character, in my opinion, is a little different to an extent. Like when I think of a dub, I think of two things. It's the adaptation of the script, the studio's influence on it, and also the voice actor's portrayal along with censorship that's included, which nowadays isn't as big a deal. There is still some, I bet, but it's not as big as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I
Which
think
I
the worst thing would been was when Funimation bought Air Species reviewers without reading the manga and
yeah,
understanding what it was about.
that was dumb. I don't I don't know that they ever got to the dubbing phase of that though. I could be
They
wrong.
did.
Oh, they
They
did?
did 3 episodes. They dropped it when they found out it was in the fourth episode.
Oh my gosh. I'm surprised they even dubbed the rest then. I'm surprised because
They
they have a
didn't.
delay. No, I'm saying I'm surprised they dubbed up to the 3 episodes because usually Funimation has a bit of a delay between the subbed release and the dubbed release. The only exception really to that rule with Fruits Basket, but like generally speaking, there was usually a 3 episode delay between the sub release and the dub release. So that's why I'm shocked that they dubbed up to episode 3 because I would assume that they got through like 3 episodes of the sub and then were like, oh no, we're not doing this anymore. That's where my surprise is.
I do believe a different company bought the DVD rights or the distribution rights, so there might be a chance it might get dubbed, but it's very iffy if that'll happen or not.
They, I mean, at that point they would have to fund whatever dubbing studio would work with them. Which I mean, there are many different dubbing studios that are partnered with the different anime companies, but I would be
My thing
curious
is
to see.
Funimation has done scenes though similar to what happened in Air Species Reviewer, even though they weren't like the whole show. There were scenes that did include that type of interaction. I'm trying to be safe for YouTube here, but I will
Sure.
say like uh Hellsing Ultimate, they dubbed that scene. You probably know what I'm talking about.
Well,
With
I mean,
Sarah's backstory.
so the thing
Was
is though, I think there's a difference between it being like a single scene, maybe 2 scenes, compared to it being a major part of the series as a whole. I think there's a major difference there. Like, yes, like they.
well, there's several fan service stuff they've also dubbed, technically.
Mhm. I think the issue though was that they had it on. They specifically had it on the Funimation streaming service, and that was what the issue was because there was way too much 18 plus content. But again, like you stated, it was an issue of them not reading into the source material before they decided to buy the rights, and then they decided to, partway through, not host it anymore.
Which the funny thing is, that's the main concern I have with the merger that Crunchyroll and Funimation did. Like, this is the main thing I'm kind of worried about, that they buy a property, they have no clue what's actually about, and they just shelf it, and nobody can buy the rights till like way later on, basically.
I think that with Crunchyroll, they would be better at that though, because I think Crunchyroll does a better process of handling multiple series, but I could be wrong.
I kind of disagree because noting how low the subtitle people are being paid, I assume they probably don't research that much. Assuming, though.
But maybe, I don't know. Again, at the end of the day, Crunchyroll, for each season they handle more series, it seems, than Funimation. It depends on the season though, but like I could see them having a better vetting process with with Crunchyroll being involved, but I do understand where your concern comes from.
I do like this idea, at least how I would propose it. Just give Crunchyroll the more hardcore stuff, and Funimation just acquires everything else. Because there could be a way you could do it that way.
Maybe. I mean, either way, if they wanted to do more hardcore stuff, they would have to have age verification. Which, at the very least, Funimation does have that already.
Well, I'm saying they could do that with Crunchyroll. It's like, alright, if you're looking for this type of stuff, you can go here. But if you want more normie stuff, I guess you could go Funimation.
But again, like, they both already have both. That's the thing, is that, like, I don't think they would necessarily want to have to, like, retool things just to, like, saddle certain stuff on one platform or over the other. I don't think that's a business practice that they would do.
Saying that's the issue with their acquirement of the show, though. That's what I'm bringing up, though. Like, they've done stuff like equivalents. It's like, it's very odd the way they handled it, technically.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, that being said, though, I think we can, again, talk more about some of the good and bad examples of dubs. Starting at least with some of the not-so-great examples. So, usually, the only times that I necessarily have issues with dubs would be where they kind of take out certain mannerisms from the Japanese source material, or they just add something completely different. So, for example, like, while that time I got reincarnated as a slime dub isn't necessarily bad, I don't like how they handled the dubbing of Rimuru, the main character, because Rimuru in the Japanese dub, or in the Japanese version, he's, you know, he was a 30-something office worker, and so he had some kind of, like, various mannerisms and whatnot that, like, an office worker would have, and sometimes some lame jokes that went along with it, compared to the English dub, where they kind of made him more, like, cool, radical kind of stuff, and it's just like, this isn't the same personality. This doesn't click as well compared to the Japanese version. And I had a similar experience with the dub of Log Horizon, where, well, with Log Horizon, I watched 3 minutes of one of the dubbed episodes, and as soon as I found out that they made one of the characters, like, whoa, tubular, like, surfer kind of attitude, and I was just like, no, I'm done. I can't do this. I cannot do this. Like, that's usually my experience, though, with bad dubs, where, like, they just take certain mannerisms that are supposed to be one way and change it in a way that it just completely changes the character for the worse.
That's kind of understandable. I think there's times where it kind of works. I think the only good example I can think of, which is an older one, would be Yu-Gi-Oh! GX's dub, because I think they kind of made it more satirical compared to their first dub, in my
Hmm.
opinion. And you can tell it's like you have characters like they're just all over the place. It's hard to describe unless you've seen it, but oh man, it, like Chaz, I think he's like hilarious. It's like what they did with it.
Yes, I agree. Though I wouldn't consider it part of the modern dubs, just because that was still part of like the four
Yeah,
kids
I
era.
know.
But
I'm
yeah,
just trying to. I'm
right.
just saying like an example when you can change a mannerism and still have it work.
Yes, but that like to your point though, it like they completely changed like the tone and whatnot of the series as a whole compared to keeping the rest of the series the same but changing the attitude and mannerisms of one particular character. And that's where my issue was, at least with these.
I guess that's a fair point.
um the only other one, and this is, I guess this will be a slightly controversial take, maybe not. I'm not the biggest fan of the My Hero Academia dub. Um, but that's just because I feel like some of the voices don't fit for certain characters. Like there are some characters that like just have incredibly deep voices compared to their Japanese counterparts, and it's, I mean, not that I should necessarily talk since I'm a deep voiced guy myself, but like for some of the characters, because I heard the Japanese voice first, it's a little off putting. This like, oh man, they really went for a deep voice here. Like, does not click for me.
Can you give me a few examples since I haven't seen a Japanese dub? You could probably help me out with it.
I want to say it's for like Todoroki and Kirishima. They like have. I think it was more Todoroki for me than Kirishima, kind of off putting for me. But like, it was too deep to my liking. And I think that's just a personal choice for me, and it's not as egregious as a thing, like I said, for like Slime or Log Horizon, but like it didn't mesh right for me. I think
I
overall
think
the
with me, it's more how they adapted tones. So they basically got obviously deeper voices for as far as voice actors go, but I do think that Todoroki in particular does stand out to me as one of the few characters. I feel like maybe his voice could have been a bit higher because he is a high schooler.
mm-hmm.
Kirishima's like okay, he's kind of like a surfer dude bro-ish voice. So it's like I can tolerate that. Like that's just I can kind of see where you're coming from. That's a little different as far as my opinion with Kirishima because I feel like he fits his character, but the voice is a bit off, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
To your point,
Yeah, I think overall it's not too bad, but like again, I just wasn't a big fan of certain choices. I can definitely say the same about Welcome to Demon School Irmakun. Like I watched a couple clips of the dub on YouTube and I was just like, "Oh my god, I'm glad that I watched the sub version instead because I did not like certain characters. I did not like how they were voiced personally. But I think that is, at the end of the day, there's a lot of personal biases that kind of that determines whether like a dub is good or bad for certain people, just because of like certain like preconceptions they might have about the characters. Um, but those are really the only ones that I can like say where I'm just like, I did not like that personally. I didn't. And I'm glad that I watched the sub. But were there any? Are there any modern dubs that you've listened to where you're just like it doesn't work for you?
actually, to get back to my hero, I think I don't. I honestly don't like Deku's voice actor, and it's not really meant to be attack on him, but it's more of his portrayal because I think he sounds very too passive and points, in my opinion. Like he has this weird like monotonous about his voice, you know? Like
Gotcha.
you get where I'm saying?
Yeah, I suppose I can. Yeah, I can see that.
Like when I listen like the dub that I'm recently listening to is Black Clover. And I think like Dallas Reed's portrayal of Asta sounds more what Decker should sound like, in my opinion.
I will say I love I do personally love the Black Clover dub. Um the Black Clover dub is one of those few anime where in my personal opinion, the dub is better than the sub, period. And there are very few examples that are like that for me. Like the only other like big one that I consider the dub better than the sub would be Dragon Ball, personally. But Black Clover is up there because I cannot handle Asta's Japanese voice, and that's really weird because the voice actor for Asta in Japan is the same voice actor for oh my god, why am I Shinra from Fire Force. And Shinra from Fire Force is completely fine. Like there are no issues with his voice. And on top of that, Asta's voice actor sang like the 14th ending song for the Black Clover anime. No issues, but like for whatever reason, like the casting director, like the voice director for the anime was just like, yeah, we want you to be like shrill and obnoxious, and it does not work for me. Like the Japanese voice for Asta does not work, and the dub is what saved me and allowed me to continue watching the anime. And on top of that, like the dub choices that they have for the characters in general for Black Clover, I think are fantastic.
Yeah, I honestly think when watching it, it's like, even though it's not the greatest anime in the world, it really meshes fine with my taste, because I finished Naruto Shippuden a while back, and I'm pretty close to catching up with MHA here, so it's kind of like a nice in-between, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And a quick thing I will say, this is a personal preference again, but I do prefer Chris Sabat as Yami over Chris Sabat as All Might. I think his character as Yami is more interesting in my opinion. But I digress. Were there any other...
I will say All Might is probably one of the better characters in MHA that's voiced, to be 100% honest.
Fair enough.
As far as between Yami and All Might, I still like All Might. The only issue I have with Sabat's performance is when he's like in his, like, I guess you would call Small Might, or like his skinnier form, I guess. I think that it's a little different. Maybe it's just the lines, possibly, but I do think in the fighting scenes he sounds really good as All Might.
Right.
Like, hands down.
Mm-hmm.
Which, it is Sabat. He's good at that stuff, honestly.
Yeah. Were there any other bad modern dubs? Oh, I remembered one. I was not a fan of how they adapted part 1 and part 2 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Personally.
Oh man, because I get to watch that later down the line here. I'm planning to, because I was invited to an RP. It's like, wait a second, I don't know enough about JoJo's. I need to catch up on anime. It's like, oh no.
Yeah, so
go through the first 2 seasons.
With the JoJo dub for part 1, Jonathan Joestar is dubbed by Johnny Yongbosch, and his British accent is incredibly subtle, despite the fact that he is playing a British character. Meanwhile, in part 2, where you have Joseph Joestar, you have him dubbed by Ben Diskin, and while yes, he is of British descent, he is raised in America, and despite that, has a very strong British accent. And I am not a fan of that. Because, like, especially because I did watch the JoJo's, like, the Japanese version first, I really liked, like, the brash nature of Joseph Joestar, and, like, I liked that better than, like, this British voice that they gave him for the dub. It didn't make sense to me, just because, again, like, yes, I get it that he was born in Britain, but again, and he was raised by his British grandma, but he was raised in America. Like, he shouldn't have this strong of a British accent, in my opinion. But that's just one of those things for me, which is like, I'm not a fan. And then, like, when they get to the part 3 dub, the British accent is gone. When Robert Epcar is voicing Joseph in part 3, that British accent is gone. It's just Robert Epcar, and he does a really good job, I will say that. But it's just, that is my complaint with the JoJo dub, is with the British accents.
I will say what disappointed me was the "Are You Approach Me" scene, because I just had to see it because it was iconic.
Mm-hmm.
And Dio in the dub is awful, in my opinion. He doesn't have the tone like that the Japanese dub kind of has. The more like grimy as sarcastic type of vibe going on, you know.
You're
Like,
saying that
like
you're
Dio
saying the
should have
Japanese voice is grimy?
Well, I mean, like the sarcasm you can hear, like the more like villainous tone.
That's not grimy though. That's no.
It's not the right word.
The Japanese voice, there's a lot of like charisma and seduction in his tones. That is
I meant
so far from grimy, dear God.
I meant to say the English dub sound more. That I said the wrong thing. That's
okay. I mean, I love Patrick Seitz, but like I do love the Japanese voice actor for Dio. I do appreciate him.
The thing is, like, I like the charisma that's shown in that scene, but I feel like the dub kind of tones it down a bit.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason. Maybe it was the voice director's fault. I don't know. But it just seems like a bit more passive, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the Japanese dub has, like, this cockiness, this charisma. It's like, hey, you're trying to approach me, aren't you? It's like, I was kind of wanting that type of vibe, but it's more like he was being a bit more intimidating English dub, I guess. Mm-hmm. It's hard to describe it. It's like, oh, you're approaching me. It's more like that. It's not like it seems like a confidence thing versus more like a more over the top, I guess. It's hard to describe.
Mm-hmm. Otherwise, any other bad dubs for you, or not so much?
I think Netflix's Seven Deadly Sins is very, like, okay-ish, you know?
I think it's alright. I personally don't have any complaints about the dub. I will say the fact of the matter, I thought it was funny that I think it was either in season 2 or season 3 they dubbed a certain character with a male voice, despite the fact that like later on in the series you realize that character is actually a female. So that was one of those things where it's just like, aha, you did a goof. You didn't check it enough. But I don't think it's anything bad.
I honestly can't wait till they get to that, and they're gonna have to figure out what they're going to do with that.
Well, they already did. Like, they got to it.
Oh, they did. Oh no, what'd they do?
I mean, I haven't watched it yet, but I just know that they got to it.
Oh man, I can't wait to pick up season 3, because I kind of dropped it after season 2-ish, because I think the pandemic kind of hit in between, you know? So it's like, eh. And I heard the animation was pretty awful. So
yeah,
like,
when they changed studios, it was not good. It was, there was definitely a drop in quality. It's not the worst drop in quality compared to some other anime adaptations, but it is bad.
Is it more comparable to like what happened with One Punch Man?
Yeah, I mean, like, I would say a little bit worse than One Punch Man.
Okay.
Obviously One Punch Man's biggest issue was that like they just completely cut out the Sakuga. It was like literally, like character design, like, and then they would just flash they would like shift to like different poses really fast to simulate movement rather than actually animating it. And yes, there are certain things that aren't drawn as good as well, but like that was my biggest issue with One Punch Man, where they just did not have animation for fights. But yeah, otherwise, I guess we can move on to some good examples though. Speaking speaking on the Netflix side of things, some of the Netflix dubs I think are really good. Devilman Crybaby had a really good dub, in my opinion. I think that it worked out really well. And Great Pretender was a big surprise for me. They made that work really well, especially given the fact that with Great Pretender they have a lot of different languages that they actually speak. Like with the Great Pretender dub, they actually started out in Japanese first, and then once they switch over to America, when they're supposed to start speaking English, that's when they actually shift to the English side of things, and I thought it was really great. And they do, again, speak other languages as well later on, and they incorporate the Japanese stuff for that, but they picked voice actors that made it work for the English side of things. And again, actually, another Johnny Yongbosh role. He played the Japanese lead in this series, and I thought that was really good. But I will say... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you can go ahead. I'll finish.
Oh, I was going to say, at least for the vast majority of the Japanese... the English dubs that I have watched on Netflix, I think things have been good. More often than not, though, I have stuck with the subs for certain things, just because I like hearing the original direction that they had for them. But sometimes when you want to speed through an anime, or if you want to have something on in the background, the dub is nice. The one dub I refuse to watch would be Beastars, though, and that's just because the voice actress for Haru for the English dub was also the voice actress for Kari from Digimon, and that's just one of those things where it's just like, I really do not want to hear Kari from Digimon trying to have sex with this deer or wolf right now. I can't handle it. I can't do it. Which I think that's honestly kind of funny, though, just thinking of how many voice actors from series that we watched as kids are still voice actors today, and some of that disconnect for certain voices that might be more mature, or certain roles that are more mature than what we grew up with.
Oh, speaking of accusations, not
accusations. What?
Acquirements.
Acquisitions.
Acquisitions. I mean, apparently Crunchyroll just confirmed that Verve is part of Sony's deal, actually.
Oh. I mean, that makes sense.
So,
Verve is owned by Crunchyroll, so that's interesting.
Pretty big.
All right.
Yeah, I found that on Anime News Network. It popped up here.
Mm-hmm. The one
as
other...
far as surprise dub, I would say Netflix's dub of Vinland Saga is pretty good, from what I've heard from it.
Netflix didn't... What? Netflix?
Yeah.
Amazon Prime originally had the rights to Vinland Saga.
They do, but Netflix got the English rights for other territories, basically.
Oh, gotcha. Interesting.
So Sentai has the rights also, so that's why it's very interesting to have two different dubs right now.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess we can kind of get into that here. So,
well, before we do, I want to say at least the one other dub that I really did like was Fruits Basket, the simul dub that Funimation had that obviously we mentioned before. I really loved Fruits Basket's dub. I think it's one of the best dubs that Funimation has done. Although the only issue I had was with the voice actress for Momiji, the one that spoke German in the dub. There's this awkward transition where Momiji goes through puberty in the final season of Fruits Basket, and it's very... It feels awkward with how the voice actress is trying to almost force the deeper version of the German voice to come out. It's really the only one issue I have with the dub, but otherwise I think it's great. So for anyone that loves Fruit Basket, the dub is pretty good. But yes, we can move on to the redubbing and whatnot, like you were mentioning.
Yeah. Well, a few dubs I liked for people who are curious. I think Black Clover's kind of new enough. I'll count that, I guess, for
Yes.
now.
Yep, I consider
And MHA, I would say it's all right. I think that's gotten better by season 2. I feel like I think that the actors got better in the character by that point. But I will say season 1 was a bit rough for me personally. And I'm not too sure why.
it. Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if it's the plot. I don't know if it's that they weren't as in character then. But I will say afterwards it gets better for me.
Mm-hmm.
But let's see, what else have I seen? I'm trying to think of. A lot of stuff's been on hiatus mostly. Oh yeah, there's one other one. Crunchyroll did My Next Life as a Villainous. That one's really good. I actually like that.
I have not checked out the dub for that, but My Next Life as a Villainous is actually one of my favorite anime.
I like the concept a lot because season 2 is definitely gonna explore more stuff. Season 1 seems like to introduce you to the concept, I feel like, but season 2 is like, well, now you don't have much else to go off of now, so you have to figure out things on your own, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that doesn't spoil too much, honestly. Try not to spoil things here, obviously.
Sure.
But that's it for the most part. I guess One Piece, I really like Doflamingo's voice actor. He's been really hamming it up for Dressrosa, and I've really been enjoying it.
He was really, from what I heard from the interview, he was really happy that he actually got to come back and be like a big part of it again, because he loves the role. And I feel dumb for not mentioning One Piece, but One Piece really does have a good dub overall. Like it is very good. They have a very large cast, obviously, but I think people need to give the One Piece dub more credit because there is a lot of good that gets done in the One Piece dub. The Japanese voices are iconic, but like they do a really good job with the One Piece dub. Mm-hmm.
I guess now we can get to the other topic again.
Yes. So redubbing, like you mentioned, is I guess a big thing, especially when the rights are split between different companies that you mentioned, or different countries.
Yeah, so what some people might not understand with English dubbing, some people think, oh, it's just made for the United States. Well, there's some at the time that were made for Canada. There were sometimes made some for England, Australia. A lot of it's just broadcasting rights and laws, whatnot, standards. But more recently, Netflix has been dubbing Vinland Saga, even though Sentai also has the rights for it. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that's kind of happening.
It's so weird to think that there's I mean, it makes sense that Vinland Saga would eventually get dubbed, but it's so weird to think that it's finally getting one after years of not having one, if that makes sense. Because again, it was on Amazon Prime originally, however many years ago.
Yeah, I sent you a clip you can watch later, but basically what happened was that Netflix got the rights essentially, but it's being broadcast in other countries, so like you can't watch it on American Netflix, but if you switch it over you can watch it elsewhere technically. So it's a very bizarre phenomenon that Netflix wanted it for that reason.
Mm-hmm. This would be a really great segue for a VPN sponsorship, but obviously I'm not monetized yet, so oh well. No VPN sponsorship. Yeah, I know. Yeah, ExpressVPN or NordVPN or Shark VPN, I don't know, but either way, like Yeah, unless you.
This dolphin is sponsoring Surfshark VPN. Don't get eaten by a shark. Watch
Oh my
anime
god.
instead.
Yep. Give me my money, Surfshark VPN. No, but I digress. Um, no, it's and obviously though, like Netflix has also, like we mentioned, redubbed other things too. Like the fact that Evangelion was redubbed. That's such a big thing. So I'm I'm curious to see other dubs at this point, to see like what else is out there, and it's just fascinating to me.
There's a few other stuff, but a lot of it's more original productions that they're collaborating with Viz Media technically.
Mm-hmm.
Like Castlevania, they do that. They also done Seismanos, which is a very mid show, but I still recommend it to people because I like the animation technically.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I think Dogma, they do that one. I'm trying to think what else that they recently been doing. I can't think of much else at the moment though.
Did they do the Witcher anime that's coming out?
Yes, they're doing that. I believe they're doing the Cyberpunk anime that's supposed to come out. Who knows if that's still happening?
Who knows?
The other big one that I remembered was they did Zeus.
Ugh,
God,
Blood of Zeus.
Whatever.
My
Which I
friend
heard
who's a big
the audio mixing was awful in that show.
jeez.
That's what's stopping me from watching it. Actually, I heard it's good though.
Fair and it's good depending on who you talk to. My friend who's a big mythology buff hated it, but I completely understand where he's coming from on that.
I might still give it a shot, but the thing is, like, I just don't know if the audio mixing's that terrible.
Mm-hmm. Um, well, other than that, I think that, I mean, was there anything else that you wanted to mention for redubbing, or I think briefly touching on it is fine.
I think Funimation redid Akira, and I think that was kind of controversial at the time.
Oh, did not know that, but I could definitely, obviously, that would definitely be controversial for sure. Redubbing anything that is, I don't know how to phrase this, like considered like touching holy ground, I guess, in a way, like because Akira is that big of a thing, like that's always going to be controversial. And I mean, even the Evangelion redub was controversial as well. So I don't know. I think it's interesting to see like if anyone is gonna redub anything else that's a big thing in the future. But I think that will always be a point of controversy.
I'm trying to look up who was the person who originally did Akira, actually. Because I think Funimation might have bought the stuff for that.
Gotcha.
But I need to find it first.
Sure. Well, at least while you do that, we can move on to the next small topic before we get to like the one big topic at the end here. One of the other big things that needs to be talked about is fan dubbing and abridged dubbing, which obviously is not official, and is really kind of, it's a medium that has shrunk over the years just because of copyright infringement. Kind of the golden age of fan dubbing and abridged dubbing was definitely in the late 2000s, early 2010s, especially when like the YouTube and whatnot was still on the newer side of things, and like it was a platform for people to post everything. And that's, at least in terms of like abridged dubbing, that's when we got like Yu-Gi-Oh abridged, and Team 4 Star, and One Kids Entertainment and stuff like that. And it's really interesting to see how, at least for like a bridge series, how that's really impacted how people perceive like very like big series in the West. Like there are memories and whatnot that have been overwritten, at least for me, because of Yu-Gi-Oh and because of Yu-Gi-Oh Abridged and because of Dragon Ball Z Abridged. There are certain things where I just appreciated what they did more in the Abridged series compared to like what we got with the English dub, either by like 4Kids, Ocean's Dub, Funimation, etc. And I do think it's interesting that because, at least in case of like Team 4 Star, because of what they did with Dragon Ball Z Abridged, they actually got certain voice acting gigs in the future because of what they did. I think that's hilarious.
Which I find that funny, but I did look up the company for Akira. So the original people who did it was called Streamline Pictures. These people came out around the 80s, and they're like the first North American company to basically distribute translated anime uncut and basically faithful to the original content technically, which is very interesting.
I
But as far as their
never heard of them before.
As far as their lineup, they did Lupin. They did one called Mr. Happy. Never heard of that one. Let's see. 3x3 Eyes. Never heard that one either. Let's see. It seemed like a pretty... Oh, they did Vampire Hunter D, actually. That's a pretty big one.
That is a big one.
I'm trying to see what other one. They did Fist of the North Star? Okay. There's a couple of big ones they've done. It seems... Let's see, as far as ones I know, that's it. They did Neon Tokyo. I don't know if you heard that one.
Not off the top of my head.
They did Kiki's Delivery Service, actually. That's a good one.
That's another big one.
Let's see. It seems like that's all I can recognize, though. They did a few good ones. Oh yeah, I did do Akira, but that's kind of it.
Gotcha.
Oh, they did Castle in the Sky. Okay.
So they did Ghibli stuff before the other studios did Ghibli then. Gotcha.
I mean, that makes sense because Ghibli was probably an underdog when it first started, technically.
Right.
Until Disney's like, hey, this thing makes money.
Yeah.
Let's take this.
All right. Well, back onto the topic at hand. I know you at least have more experience, I believe, on the fan dubbing side of things, outside of like abridging.
So fan dubbing, it's a very lucrative market. So if you want to do something more legit, you have to pick something that is basically in copyright limbo. So, for example, in order for something to be in copyright limbo, it has to be produced by a studio, but it's at the point where the rights are held by somebody else, but the studio still has rights technically. So the best example I'd say would be with Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0. It was animated by Toei. Toei did everything for it. The rights switched over to 4Kids and switched over to Konami, so you have a lot of rights jumping technically. So it's basically in the limbo state where no dub was officially made, but all the assets are technically there. Like the whole, like whatever seasons were done for it.
Gotcha.
And it's more faithful to the manga as far as I've been watching. It basically covers like the pre-card game stuff, which is kind of cool.
Yes.
And that's why I believe Daigo he made a video on it because I recommended him to watch it, and he did a really good review on that. So I'll recommend that because I don't do reviews. But I will say he did cover a bit of the fan dub, which the fan dub people, for people who are curious, they're Team Millennium. They've been working on a movie, actually. The movie that came out around for Season 0, which was called, I think it was like the Red Eyes Black Dragon movie, kind of.
Yep.
It's where the art style became more of what we know what it is today, basically.
A little bit, at least.
I would say like a rough draft, I guess. be
I
the
think
best way to
Kaiba
describe
still
it.
had green hair in that, though.
I don't know.
But I digress. I just given how long we've been going, shouldn't go too far into this, but because we got a few other topics to cover. But um,
We don't
I'm
have to
definitely
go
interested
too
in
far.
checking that out. Because I am a fan of the original Yu-Gi-Oh pre-card games. But I am aware of that movie only because Little Karibo did a season 0 movie abridged version of that specific movie.
Yeah, you can see right here he has brown hair, and the designs are relatively close to what we have today.
Gotcha. Okay, so it was in the season 0 anime where he still had green hair. So, gotcha.
Yeah, the anime he still had green
Yeah.
hair for whatever reason, but in the movie he had the correct color.
Gotcha. All right. And I believe
I think we can go to our next topic. That's all I really wanted to cover with that. Just
sounds
if you
good.
want to check out Team Millennium, I'll probably just link you that if you want to check that later, along with the Finland Saga Netflix dub clip I sent you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, then the last topic, and this is a big topic in and of itself that I wanted to talk about in this podcast, would be talking about at least one of the biggest complaints, especially for back in the day with dubbing, that people used as an excuse to say that the Japanese version was better, was that in the dubs they were always using the same 7 to 10 people to voice every single character. And that may have been true, way back in the day when like some of these companies were new, especially like with Funimation, like in its early days, like with Dragon Ball Z and with Yu Yu Hakusho as an example, they had characters voicing multiple characters in the series. But to be honest, Japan has that same problem if you think about it. And whether or not you call it a problem, there are a lot of Japanese voice actors that get reused for multiple series over and over and over again. But I do acknowledge that for, dubbing in the US, there are a lot of, the usual suspects. Obviously, Johnny Yongbosh was a big one back in the 2000s when he was voicing almost any protagonist in an anime series, where you had him as Ichigo in Bleach, you had him as Lelouch in Code Geass, he was in Gurren Lagann, he was in, I think he was in Eureka 7, as Renton, I could be wrong, but like he was a big one. Obviously Chris Sabat has been in almost everything, when it comes to dubbing, but he's also really good at what he does. And in terms of modern day ones, you've got Bryce Papenbrook, you got Ian Sinclair, Todd Haberkorn, Patrick Seitz. Like, yes, they are all ones where they are very prolific voices that we hear a lot in various dubs. But in today's dubbing world, they have a lot more voice talents nowadays compared to what they used to. And like, obviously My Hero Academia is a good example of that. Black Clover is a good example of that. One Piece continues to employ a lot of different people to voice act for things. So I think that old excuse of English dubs, being all the same and using the same characters, I think that really is a thing of the past, and that's not something that people should use as a complaint like they used to. Would you agree or disagree with that point?
I've been the type of person to say, like, you should hire, like, the person who would do a good job with it, but I do think that we're reaching a point where some people, I feel like, are overstaying their welcome to an extent, and it's kind of iffy, like, the guy who voices, like, Joe Swanson, like, in Family Guy, that guy?
Patrick Warburton.
Yeah. I think he does like the same voice in like almost every show I've seen. He has the same voice like in Buzz Lightyear, which is very weird to listen to. He's done it with Krog. It's like there's a few people in anime I can kind of recognize. Like, for example, when Vic was recently replaced by Johnny Young Bosch in the games, he basically just sounds like Ichigo. He doesn't have like a distinct like voice yet for Broly, in my opinion.
Yeah, I with Johnny Yongbosh, he does have a, like with any of the people that I've mentioned, they're all ones that definitely do have their distinct voices, and I think that they do get typecasted because they have those voices. Um, I think I would still like to think that Johnny Yongbosh to a degree has managed to um differentiate things enough for certain characters. Like I think his portrayal in Great Pretender was good. And I think with him in like Black Clover um was good just because it was like a more raspy voice than the clear cut tone that we're used to. But he is, I would definitely agree, he is someone that like, because he's had so many prolific roles all around the same time, it's very hard to like not be like, oh well, that's Ichigo. I do agree with you there.
Well, it's not necessarily that. It's more that I think maybe with the Broly example, it could have been like last minute esque, so he probably just gave like a good performance, but it's not like a distinct character, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the only issue I have with some voice actors. I feel like they try to be themselves sometimes and not try to create like a new character to an extent.
Sure. Well, and again, I think it's one of those things where they are, to an extent, they are typecasted because of their voices. Like, if a studio wants like a Chris Sabat, they'll hire Chris Sabat because they know what their voice is like. The other big thing too is that at least back in the day, um, they had to keep hiring the same people because the same people at least had that experience. Like for people that are not aware, when it comes to dubbing, like you, especially for like companies that match this, you have to match lip flaps when it comes to anime. And they, for these dubbing companies, they create a script that yes is it's not always 100% faithful because they are trying to match the lip flaps. They have to do the best that they can to match it with the timing of the anime. And so you have to be an actor that is able to match your delivery to the exact timing of a script. It's not like, like a cartoon where they're making the animation as they go, or like a live show. They have to be able to give their dialogue in a specific amount of time, and that was not a skill set that a lot of people necessarily had in that time. So that's why, at least for anime dubs, you had a lot of the same people that could, like, that were experienced in doing that, hired again and again. Whereas, at least nowadays, because the internet has become as big of a thing as it is, a lot more people are able to practice that. So not only are we able to get more talent nowadays, but we're able to get talent that actually is able to, train and experience what it's like to voice things in a given time frame like that. So that
I do have an interesting question to ask you. So I'm curious your perspective on this.
sure.
Do you think it would be better, like for example, like a Funimation, Crunchyroll, Sony, like them as a conglomerate to essentially pay for additional animation to make the lip flaps match better for different regions? Or would that be hurting the source material?
That wouldn't be hurting the source material, but they have no reason to do that when they have people that can script and change things to work better.
Well, I'm saying to keep it more the original like dialogue. Because there's a lot of stuff that tends to get cut short, obviously, if the lip flaps don't allow it.
Sure, I mean, I think it's nitpicky at that point, in all honesty. Like,
No, I
sure,
agree. This is a nitpick for sure. But
there
I'm just
are
saying,
certain
like,
scenes and whatnot that, yes, if they had like a little bit more lip flaps, they'd be able to get it done, and get it done to more accurately say things similar to like the Japanese dialogue. But it doesn't happen enough, I think, where it needs to be edited to allow that. Like, that's just not how it is. You have abridgers, obviously, that put in the effort to do that because they're trying to specifically make that script work, and they're able to edit lip flaps to make it work. But for a major company doing it, nah, just write a different script and make it close enough. And they have enough experience at this point to do that, that paying extra money to edit the animation would just be an unnecessary expense.
because the only good example I can think of at the moment was when I watched Lupin the first in theaters, and it's very telling in scenes where the lip flaps do not match for the dub.
Oh, sure.
And it feels like it could have been way better if they just fixed that. Because it's more noticeable, I guess, in CGI, I guess, than 2D animation, I assume. It's kind of hard because I also saw Broly in the third Code Geass movies. That's why I'm thinking it could just be a CGI thing.
That was how I felt about Earwig and the Witch, like the CGI Ghibli movie. There were certain scenes that just did not jive well. Like there were certain disconnects. So I understand that.
Well, my disconnect was just the voice acting. I think, as far as Lupin goes, majority of the scenes worked really well in CGI because Lupin is like a rubbery-esque type of character.
Yes.
He can move around in a way where it seems realistic for him.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I definitely agree. But yeah, again, just to answer your question, I just think it would be an unnecessary expense just because of the experience that they have at this point. And I think they'll overlook certain things where it's just like, oh, well, this is just a momentary disconnect over the whole product.
I guess with CGI, it'll probably just take more time, I assume, because it's more of a newer thing. So maybe it'll get better. That's my hope, at least.
It also depends on how accurately they're trying to make the lip flaps. Like, if they're, like, more accurately matching the lip flaps of the Japanese being spoken, then it's going to be an issue of matching it. So, I guess we'll have to see how accurate they make that in the future. And they can definitely do so in in CGI, I think, a little bit more than 2D animation.
I feel like CGI would be easier because you kind of have the models there.
Right.
If it's more with collaboration with the studio to just arrange that.
Right.
Of course, it probably costs a lot to re-render stuff because I know CGI requires a lot of processing power, honestly. So that could be what's stopping it, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Oh, that being said,
What else do we got?
So on the flip side of things, because of, the complaint of how the English dubs always use the same actors and whatnot, in all honesty, the same thing can be said about Japanese voice actors. But again, people kind of, make the thing of like, oh, well, it's fine in Japanese, it's source material. But like, again, you have characters that have very distinct voices that are voicing characters over and over and over again in very, like, small spaces of time, like, and even sometimes in the same season. So for me at least, this stems from like one voice actor in particular, but it's for multiple, and I call it the overhaul effect with Kenjiro Suda. So Overhaul, obviously the main villain of season 4 for My Hero Academia, and he has a very distinct voice. You can tell, well, you can tell him apart from any other character in literally any anime that he's a part of. And that's the thing, like Kenjiro Suda, like, he's had a lot of very iconic roles. He was Seto Kaiba from the Yu-Gi-Oh series that we were just talking about. He was Kento Nanami in Jujutsu Kaisen. He played the main character Sakaido in It Invaded. He was also Adult Lambo in Katekyo Hitman Reborn way back in the day. But like, and he was also the narrator for Cells at Work Black. But that's the thing, is that like, he's a character much like, you know, Johnny Youngbosch or Chris Sabat or Bryce Papenbrook, where he has a very distinct voice. And he gets used a lot. He has a role pretty much in every in a single or more anime in every anime season. And that's not a bad thing, but again, it just kind of plays to that same joke of like people in English saying, "Oh, well, they just use the same characters." So does Japan, a lot. And I know I didn't list any female voice actresses on the English side of things. I think Monica Rial is kind of one of the main ones that gets used a lot on the English side of things, but at least on the
I think she does okay. Like, I've listened to several English dubbed anime that she's in, and I think she does fine for her portrayals, but I do notice sometimes she uses the same one, which maybe it's voice directors, you know? It's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah. But at least on the Japanese side of things, one of the more recent English voice, or not English, one of the more recent Japanese voice actresses that's in like everything is Aoi Yuki, who plays Suyu from My Hero Academia. But she's also Azusa from I've Been Killing Slimes for 300 Years, as well as Kumiko from the Spider Isekai. So she literally played the main character of a female isekai series in back-to-back seasons. She also plays Diane in Seven Deadly Sins. She's Mami in Rent a Girlfriend, Tamaki in Fire Force. But like, she's someone who has a very distinct voice that you hear again and again and again and again. Like, so again, I find it funny that like, for, you know, English dub people, they complained about people being reused. But like, again, some of the other examples, you've got like Yuki Kaji, who plays Shoto from My Hero, has been in multiple things. Nobuhiko Okamoto, who plays Bakugo, same thing. And then on the JoJo side of things, you've got Daisuke Ono, who plays Jotaro, and you've got Takehito Koyasu, who plays Dio. Both have very iconic voices that you hear in a lot of different series. And that's not me saying that I would have it any other way, that I wouldn't want them to be in these other anime. But again, it's that sticking point of, like, Japan reuses a lot of their voice actors, I think, more often than they do in America. And I could be very wrong with that statement, especially for, like, big cast series. But I think for the ones where they have smaller casts, they like to reuse a lot of the same people.
Say one example. This is more a personal opinion. I know it's going to be controversial to dub watchers, but I think Marie Flanagan, I don't like her portrayal as Naruto and Boruto. It just doesn't fit with me for some reason.
I mean, like, I think it is your opinion, so that is more than fair. I think when you contrast
I think she does a good job with her role, and I understand she's played the character all the way up to that point, but I just don't think it fits too well, at least in my personal opinion.
I do disagree, like, because if you do compare, like, the voices, like, her voice to the Japanese voice, like, for both young Naruto and older Naruto, I think she does do a very good adaptation of it. I think they are very similar. So, like, I would disagree. I do think that she did a good enough job matching it. Or at least matching it, like, close enough with it. But again, you are entitled to...
it's a very interesting space for me because the thing is, I really like her and like everything else that she's voiced in, but it's just like it could just be like my mind and also how time has passed. Maybe that's why I just said fit as well, possibly.
Are you saying that you would have preferred more of a male voice?
Or if she went like an octave a bit lower, I think it would have been fine. If they modified it.
I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have wanted it modified, personally. I
Well,
feel like that feels unnatural.
well, I'm just saying like it's hard to describe. Like I guess an octave lower would be more natural and a bit more preferable, I guess.
Maybe, but again, I think comparing it to the Japanese voice, like, it's a pretty good comparison. Like, I
Like I said, just personal opinion.
right.
I'll probably still watch Boruto here. I'm still planning to. But the thing is, like, I probably just need to get used to it, possibly. And I just always think clips, so that's probably it, honestly.
Mm-hmm. I don't because I have a similar opinion with the Naruto comparison as I do with One Piece, where like it's very similar. Like both characters are voiced by female voice actresses in Japan and in America, and I think that like for what they've done, they've matched it really well. Obviously, the really only big difference when it comes from like English dubbing compared to the Japanese would be Dragon Ball, where you compare Goku having a female actress in Japan compared to in America where you give Goku a male voice actor. And I think that fits better having the male voice actor than it does having a female one. Again, since he's an adult. But you know,
I think Dragon Ball to me is a different juggernaut compared to One Piece because I feel like Dragon Ball itself kind of has this odd macho approach with also humor in between, kind of.
mm-hmm.
So it kind of works, I guess.
Yeah.
I think possibly my issue with Naruto is probably I might be watching scenes out of context, so maybe it might come off better if I watched it fully.
Probably.
That's what my assumption is. I think what could have happened is that I seen like a few clips people throw on Twitter. I'm like, maybe this is a bit but it could just be like, oh, they're probably just purposely putting up bad scenes to deter people because
That's
that does
very
happen
possible.
time to time.
Well, on top of that, they did have to dub all the filler episodes of Naruto too, so that doesn't necessarily help. But
And also, the first season was filler, technically. The time travel arc that did not happen in the manga.
are you talking about with Boruto?
With Boruto, yes.
Okay, I was said there's not a time travel arc in Naruto.
No, not with Naruto. I think the filler of Naruto was handled alright. Be 100% honest.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that wraps up everything I had to talk about. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap things up?
I think this is it for now. I think there's a lot more stuff. I would probably talk more about bridging, like small side note, like I was part of the team that's been abridging Dragon Ball GT abridged. Unfortunately, 2 episodes are down because YouTube stuff. But no, I think we could probably talk about bridge stuff another day since we kind of more brushed over and didn't go as in depth as we originally planned.
Right, since we were talking more about the official state of dubbing rather than the unofficial side of things. But I would say at least I think that the state of dubbing right now, and I'm saying this 2 hours in, but I think the state of dubbing is in a good place right now. I think there's a lot more talent. Sorry, the actual dubbing process. Not necessarily the state of the companies involved, but the actual dubbing, like, we are in a much better place compared to where we used to be. There's a lot more new talent that's involved, And I think the process in terms of creating a script and matching the lip flaps and whatnot has become a much better process than what it used to be. While I am concerned with the Crunchyroll Funimation merger, I'm going to stay cautiously optimistic for the time being, but obviously we'll kind of get a better picture of things definitely like a year from now, more so than anything immediately. It's definitely going to take a year to kind of see how things shape
I'm
up.
I'm kind of nervous to see what they might cancel possibly, because with any merger, there's always gonna be like cancellations, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the same, like, for example, as like the Disney 20th Century Fox merger. Like that, just because of that's a lot more things compared to um like what Crunchyroll has in comparison.
Well, you
Um
have to consider Verve also joined
Fair.
them along with
Verve
Aniplex also joined technically.
well, again, Aniplex is already owned by Funimation and Sony as it is. So,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a non-factor, but I think seeing what's affected by the other companies that are under the Verve umbrella, that might be the only thing that would be a big possible change. But
I know Verve had some original programming, so I'm curious if any of that will stick around now.
well, and so does Crunchyroll for that matter. But well, or at least it did. But I think I've
No,
got
they
my
do.
fingers
They
crossed that Verve
announced.
is still fine. But
I know Crunchyroll High Guardian Spice, but the thing is, like, I don't know enough about it, and I do know that I talked to someone who knew someone who animated on the show, and they said like the first trailer was awful, similar to Q Force that Netflix released as well.
mm-hmm.
Like it was the same type of issue, so they think that it should do okay. But from the trailer for uh, High Guardian Spice, it really seemed like a tech demo. Like a lot of stuff didn't feel that clean. So we'll just see how it goes though when it officially comes out. Honestly,
Right. All right. Well, I think that then does wrap things up. So I'm gonna give you the floor to give your last minute plugs and whatnots, and for sure for anyone that is miraculously 2 hours into this podcast still, if you're not subscribed already to Drew from What If Universe, please do so. But the floor is yours, sir. Give the plugs that you'd like to give.
if you want to check out my Twitter, that's at What If Universe. Instagram, I don't really use, so I don't know. I'm not going to promote that actually, but I will promote Dragon Ball Network. We are doing Dragon Ball GT Abridged. We have an episode in the editing stages, but as far as completion, I can't promise anything. So that's all I'm going to really say on that at the moment.
Sounds good. Well, I will make sure to link all of that stuff in the description down below for people to check out. But I definitely thank you for being part of this podcast and for, well, recommending it in the first place and volunteering. So I do thank you for being a part of this.
You're welcome. Who knows? I might come back for a different thing, but we'll see what happens to that.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, again, for anyone that is 2 hours into this podcast, if you're not subscribed already, by all means, I would sincerely hope that you consider subscribing. As for anyone that is already subscribed and has made it this far into the podcast, thank you, as always, for being here and being a part of this process. If you have any opinions on dubbed anime or the state of the dubbed anime process, the companies involved and whatnot, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. If you want to see more content like this in the future, hit that like button. Otherwise, for now, my name is Axel Blaze. Thank you guys for being a part of this experience as always, and we'll see you next time in the Spanish dubbed version of the My Axel and Friends pod. No. Much as I love Spanish, I am never never dubbing this podcast in Spanish. Sorry, Spanish listeners, but yeah. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.